Thought I'd put this on today, feel like it's quite apt. Hi there and welcome back to Circuit the World. My name's Alice and today we're going to be talking about F1 and specifically everything that's happened in the last 48 hours. It's a new segment I wanted to call Track Talk. Told you there'd be more motorsport content on the channel. Nah, haha. So let's just brief recap on exactly what has happened in the last 48 hours because as I said, it's absolutely gone crazy. So on Tuesday, it was confirmed that Sebastian Vettel would be leaving Ferrari as of 2021, leaving the big question, who would fill that highly sought after seat next to Charles Leclerc? One of the reasons people believe Vettel didn't re-sign with Ferrari is something to do with the way that the contract was written out, basically putting him down and saying, you're not number one anymore, you're number two. Leclerc is number one. So because of that, it kind of threw into question who would fill that seat because at least in my opinion, it was always going to be a case of whoever was filling that seat would be perceived as a number two. Whether that reigns to be true, we will find out in due course. Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz Jr. were the main contenders for that seat. Some other names were thrown into the ring like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, but they never really gained any traction. It became pretty clear in my mind when those two names came out, it became pretty clear to me that Sainz was going to get that seat because to me, Ricciardo's whole ethos is not really fitting to Ferrari. He's not young enough that they could have molded him the way they wanted. He's kind of stead in his ways, if you will. So he wasn't going to take on any changing or anything that Ferrari would have probably wanted him to do. Plus, I do believe he would have been more of a challenge to Leclerc than Sainz would have been, which is why I think Ferrari decided to go down the Sainz route, and they have gone to take Sainz from McLaren. That was confirmed today, along with the move that Daniel Ricciardo is leaving Renault to go and take that seat that Sainz just left in McLaren. I think there's still about 6 or 7 drivers left who are out of contract at the end of this year. Speaking of McLaren, Lando Norris is actually out of contract at the end of the year, but I'm pretty confident they're going to re-sign him on a contract extension, and that'll be the lineup they have next year. Mercedes, I think Bottas and Hamilton, I believe, are out of contract at the end of the year because Hamilton's currently working through contract negotiations. As it stands, I can't see Hamilton going anywhere because there's just not another seat that he would see worth his while. He may want to go somewhere for a different challenge, but he's still only going to go somewhere where he knows he can challenge for the championship, which probably would have been Ferrari. Bottas is still a big question mark and has been for the last few years, whether or not Mercedes will retain him or replace him. You've got young drivers like George Russell who are in the wings waiting and have affiliation with Mercedes, plus kind of Esteban Ocon, but I think at this point for Mercedes they would choose George, who has more experience and is moldable, if you will, over Ocon, who's just returned to F1 with us when this season gets started in Renault. So Mercedes has still got some questions. Red Bull, I think Red Bull's pretty tied in. It's going to be one of 4 or 2 of 4. Well, Verstappen's not going anywhere, and I think they're pretty happy with Alex Albon at the moment. So I don't see the Red Bull or the AlphaTauri lineups changing at all for next year, unless they have a young gun in the wings, which I don't think they do, if my memory's correct or my knowledge is correct. So I think AlphaTauri and Red Bull will be exactly the same as of 2021. I can't see those changing. Haas, I don't think will change. Racing Point, I don't think will change because you've got Lance Stroll, who's obviously the son of the guy who owns the team, and Sergio Perez, who brings in a lot of funding to the team, so I can't see either of those drivers changing. Renault, there's now a seat. Williams could have a seat available if Russell does get drafted up to Mercedes. Alfa Romeo could also be a question mark, and I'll get to that one in a moment. So as I said, I'm not surprised to see that Daniel Ricciardo didn't get the Ferrari seat. I kind of wish he had. I think from a spectator's point of view, it would have been much more interesting to see the fight between Leclerc and Ricciardo. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping Sainz shows up to the game. Remember, he's been a very consistent driver as of 2019. He was best of the rest. He had an amazing end to the season last year. So hopefully, I'm selling him short. Hopefully, he does bring a good fight to Leclerc in Ferrari. Just knowing the way that I feel, well, Ferrari normally are, which is they do favour a 1-2 driver system. They do favour backing one driver. I just worry that Sainz maybe slightly shoved it to the side. But we'll see. 2021 will give us the answers to these questions. I think Norris and Ricciardo are going to be a great lineup for McLaren. I feel for their PR team because they're going to be a nightmare to handle. But I do think they're going to bring an amazing energy to the paddock. Absolutely. I think they're going to bounce off each other really, really well. But on track as well, I think they're very good drivers. They kind of have a similar style of driving, I guess, of racing. It's going to be interesting to see what they do together. I'm just super excited for Ricciardo to be in a more competitive car because I do think that Renault have slightly sold him short in the last couple of years. I think the move he did when he did it from Red Bull wasn't exactly the move he thought it was going to be. I think he expected it to be a bit more effective, or I think he felt like he was going to be in a more competitive position than he was. And they haven't really done anything in the 2 years to kind of prove to him that they're making the leaps and bounds that they promised. And I think that's one of the reasons he was looking for a way out. I think the move from Red Bull was probably it's difficult. If from his position of not wanting to be a number 2 or not wanting to be pushed to be a number 2, I think it was definitely the correct decision to leave Red Bull. But at the same time, for possible wins and chances of taking on the championship and being a championship challenger, I don't think he should have moved. And I think he knew that as well. And I also think that's possibly one of the reasons he may have been slightly deterred from going to Ferrari. I gotta be honest though, I think if any of the drivers on the grid were offered a Ferrari seat, none of them would say no. They'd take it and deal with whatever stuff came with that afterwards, for sure. It's such a prestigious team. It's the team that's been in the sport since the start. It's the one that they all really want to race for, and I just can't see anyone really turning it down. For example, Sainz is probably quietly aware that Leclerc is the number 1 in that team and he's going to have to fight to try and prove his worth in that team. He's obviously confident in his abilities to do that because otherwise he wouldn't have made the decision he did. At the same time, it's a Ferrari seat. Everybody wants to be a Ferrari driver at the end of the day. As for Renault, now with an empty seat, the heaviest rumours on Mr. Alonso coming back. I'd be surprised because, as I said, Renault at the moment are not a team that are in contention for wins, let alone a championship. And Alonso made it very clear on his way out that he'd only come back if it was for a championship competing team. Now, as it stands, there aren't really any seats available on any of those teams. Arguably, technically there are, but there aren't really any seats available in those teams. So I definitely don't see him having a place in any of those 3 teams. So to see him come back to Renault after taking 2 years out, and the reasons he took the 2 years out, I would be very surprised. Would be interesting to see. I don't know, he might manage to push a little bit harder, maybe get a couple of podiums on the table, but I definitely don't think it would be championship competing. So whether he would feel that would be worth his time, I guess is the discussion point that comes up now on for him and his team. The other candidate I think is Hülkenberg, maybe trying to make a comeback. If I was Hülkenberg, I'd definitely be calling back to my old employer and being like, yo, I know you kind of outsed me last year, but let's talk, let's see what's going on. Because I don't know if there's any other way back onto the grid for Hülkenberg. He made it quite clear last year he wasn't interested in a seat in Williams or somewhere slightly lower down the grid. So I don't see there being a top team seat for him. So I think his way back would be through Renault. This takes us slightly onto Mercedes because the rumor at the moment is that chats are happening with Sebastian Vettel for Valtteri Bottas' seat. Now, I am all up for that because I think a rivalry between Hamilton and Vettel in the same car would be worth watching, and I'd be totally up for that. I think that would be great for the spectators. I think that would be amazing. I am just not sure it will happen. I still think that Hamilton probably has some sway in the team, especially if the rumour that Toto Wolff is looking to be leaving to go to what is now Racing Point but will be Aston Martin Racing as of next year. It kind of leaves Hamilton as the only big dog, if you will, in a resurging team, in a team that's got to rebuild. And I think it will build around Hamilton because of that fact if Hamilton stays in the team. So having another strong driver in next to Hamilton, with Hamilton having such a say in the sandbox, I just don't see it happening. As I said, as a spectator, I'd love to see it because I think there'd be some cracking racing and it would be great to put the two of them together next to each other in the same car and really see who comes out on top. I think it would be a great fight. I think it's really, for me, it's really important that Formula One has a challenging driver for Hamilton in the same car, if not in a different car, because you need that excitement, you need the fight. And even if the championship fight is only between 3 or 4 drivers, at least there is a fight. Arguably over the last couple of years, there hasn't really been a fight for Hamilton. It's been pretty simple sailing. Maybe at the start of the season it's looked a bit, I don't know, but by about race 4, you can normally tell he's going to walk away with it again, which as a spectator, I'm bored of seeing that. I want to see the fights come back. And like I said, even if it's just 2 or 3 cars in the fight, at least you have the fight. And that's what I think Formula One is missing a lot at the moment. If Vettel doesn't come in, I could see Russell being promoted up. I think Bottas now has had his chances. I think he's an okay support driver, but there's times where the other team's beaten him, which has taken points away from the Mercedes and the constructors. Mercedes want the strong lineup who are bringing in the top tier points every race as best to their ability. Now, as a spectator, you don't want to see that at all. But I think for Bottas, his time may be up. And if I am Mercedes, I'd be angling for a straight swap for Russell, for Bottas, and just switch him over. I think that'd be really cool. I think it'd be good to see Russell in a good car as well. You'd then have Norris in the McLaren, you'd have Verstappen in the Red Bull, Leclerc in the Ferrari, and Russell in the Mercedes. You're really building a grounds for the next generation of Formula One, and they're going to come out of the gates hot. And I think that would be really exciting to see, and it would be very exciting to see, 1, what Russell does with that car, and 2, how he fares with Hamilton as his teammate, because I think it could be very similar to what happened at Ferrari last year in 2019, in the sense that Vettel was originally a very good mentor to Leclerc, kind of showing him the ropes, bringing him into the team, bringing him into the ethos of the team, and then there was that switch mid-season where Leclerc went, hey mate, step it up or I'm going to beat you. And I would love to see something like that happen in Mercedes with Hamilton and Russell. I think that would be a great narrative for the season. I think it would be really exciting to watch. I think Red Bull are very happy with the ethos they have now, in that they only bring up their own, they only hire their own. The Red Bull drivers that are in there are the Red Bull drivers that stay. Teams like that battling for the championship don't really want to have to deal with inter-team as well as out-of-team, I guess what I'm trying to say. They prefer to be able to focus their energies on getting their one guy to beat this other one guy, rather than trying to get their 2 guys to beat this other one guy whilst not taking each other out, which is why top-tier teams do strive for the 1-2 situation, because it's just easier to handle and maintain internally. You want a strong second driver who's going to bring you the constructors points, and you want a strong first driver who's going to win you the championship to do the double. For a spectator, you don't want that, because obviously then it starts to become easy for one driver. But thinking back over my experience watching Formula One and my racing history knowledge, the best races came, or the best championships came, when that was a situation for some teams, because you did have very strong, you had more than one fight to be worried about. And even though it was always one driver and one team that had the upper hand, if you will, there was always still the fight between the other driver to see where he got and how he did. So it kind of works. I'm not a massive fan of it. I definitely don't like team orders. I think if they're out there racing, great strategies. You start to play with fire here, and if they're on a different strategy, then maybe there's cause for it, but then you have to, it's so complicated, it's a big mush. You know what I mean? I just wish they could just still go racing, but teams have their hand to play in it, and that's what you have to listen out for. Finally, Alfa Romeo is the other question mark, because Raikkonen is at the end of his contract as well, and Giovinazzi is also, I think, at the end of his contract. Now, whether Raikkonen's going to re-sign or not is a massive question mark. Nobody knows. All I am confident on is that if Raikkonen is still in the sport in 2021, he will still be an Alfa Romeo. I think it's going to be more about his desire to keep racing. If he wants to go off and do other kind of racing, I know he's a very avid rally fan. He might decide that he wants to go and do that rather than Formula One now. What goes on in Kimi Raikkonen's head, only Kimi Raikkonen, I think, really understands. But Giovinazzi will be the bigger question mark, because it's not unknown that Ferrari are kind of got a hand in the pocket at Alfa Romeo, which means it's kind of a breeding ground for their young drivers. And Mick Schumacher is looking like he's coming up the ranks. A lot of people expect to see him in Formula One in the next couple of years. I think it's all pending on his F2 performances, personally, this year. He got race wins under his belt last year. He had some strong performances last year, but he wasn't a championship contender. If this season, when we get going, in F2, Mick Schumacher can be a championship contender and either wins or is in the top 3 at the end of the season and had a mathematical chance to win, at that point, I think he will be promoted up to Alfa Romeo. And that is when Giovinazzi will fall to the wayside, because I think he's a great driver. I just don't think he's done anything exceptional, stand out. unfortunately, and I think he will be one of the first to be shifted along for some new blood to come in. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on what's happened in the last 48 hours. It's been a little bit of a whirlwind. It kind of feels like as of Tuesday when Vettel was announced to be leaving, we did kind of know what was coming. I'm kind of glad that it's all been wrapped up quite quickly as well, because there would have been so much do they, won't they, will they, won't they, and that's always relatively irritating. It seems like we're going to have a very condensed, silly season at this point. It's currently lasted 2 days, and a lot has happened. I'm sure teams will keep bringing out more things. I mean, at the moment, there's nothing really else to talk about, so teams are going to be having contract negotiations with drivers. I think we're going to see a couple more confirmed before we get back to racing, which would be cool. It'd be good to know what's going on at Renault. I think that now is the place people are focusing on most, because Mercedes are in no rush to make any decision on Bottas. They'll lock in Hamilton, and then they'll make a decision on that second seat, depending on what kind of deal they have with Hamilton. But this was the first of my track talks. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know down in the comment section below what you think about what's happened in the last 48 hours. I love to discuss this with you. This is one of my passions. I will talk about this all the live long day if I can. But anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some Formula One love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video! I was going to do an F1 2021 prediction for the grid, but it kind of feels like it's going to be sorted out in the next 2 weeks, so there's probably no point.